we're kind of in a deer in the headlights. In fact, you guys all know what they call a deer with no eyes, right? I have no idea. Yeah, okay, good. That's a good dad joke. So, uh, my background, boy, I've been in a lot of different industries over my career, including healthcare and insurance, working with banks, and then I've run some nonprofit agencies, a lot around homelessness. I've been working in the homeless field for probably 25 years, all the way from feeding to housing to actually respite care to shelters, on and on and on. So I understand also about getting people back on their feet and the importance of having community surrounded to people even when they get housed. So if we get everyone housed, that would be great. They still wouldn't be on their pathway, if you will, towards wholeness in many instances, because they have to have many wraparound services. So, but I did want to tell you a little story. We've been working. We started back in 2015, 16, when the tiny home craze started coming on the radar screen, and we don't call our homes intentionally tiny homes, because they have a specific definition about being on a trailer on wheels, kind of wheeling around the country, and not a permanent address. We build houses that are modular homes and intended to be permanently stationed on foundations, and there's reasons for that. I'll talk about a little bit later. But we have in Soledad Prison down near us. I'm from Monterey, Salinas area, so I'm up to date for this and conferences and so on. But Monterey, Salinas, we teamed up with a program called Prison Fellowship that was in the prison down in Soledad. And one of the pastors that we were working with that was going into the prison, he was telling us about, because we wanted to start looking how we can do housing. He's telling us about, a program in the prison where they'll build a little 60 square foot unit, and they'll kind of tilt up a wall, put a roof on it. We get a Sereno holding the ladder for a Norteño, which was good because that built relationships and everything else. But they build this, little 60 square foot unit, no bathroom, no mechanical anything. They tear it apart, they build it again, tear it apart, build it. And after, the fifth time, the nails were all bent and the wood was destroyed. So they get a new allotment in and start building again. We started thinking, wouldn't it be fun if we could do something redemptive with these homes? And so in 2015, 16, we started a pilot. We had a very, very proactive secretary of California Department of Corrections and Rehab at the time. And he came down, kicked it off. I think we had about 200 people at the kickoff in the prison, which is amazing in of itself to get that many people in the yard and not lose anyone that gets stuck in a prison cell. But we built about 4 units in the prison. It was a very arduous, laborious process. We had plans to build 2 and everything else, but it's a teaching institution. It's a vocational program. So, and what we wanted to do was to teach prisoners, number one, the job skills, construction skills, all the disciplines they possibly could. And the modular homes allow that in the prison, which is really cool. And secondly, is we wanted to, and that, by the way, provides a pathway towards employment ultimately. The construction industry is extremely good for men in particular and women coming out of prison because there's less barriers to entry into the employment market, which is really cool. But the thing we wanted to do also is use those homes that we build for some redemptive purposes. And that's where we started looking at, well, how can we create homeless villages or community villages where we could house people, in particular coming out of homelessness, but also out of incarceration. So this really became a strategy, if you will, for reducing recidivism. In our prison in Soledad, for example, 65% of the prisoners will go back to prison in 3 years. Not a good track record, and it costs us $100,000 a year as taxpayers. So neither of those are good outcomes, right? But we had a gentleman that was part of our program. His name is Kevin, and he was a lifer in there for manslaughter. Kevin, first time we were down there, he kind of looked at us and said, well, why are you here? And talked about why we're here, and we thought of second chances and all the other funds that we believe in. And he said, well, what about me? I'm a lifer. What is there? And he said, well, our architect said you got, with hope and purpose on what you're doing. You're actually giving back to the community, which you want to do desperately. Well, this Kevin took that and ran with it. He's probably the second in charge behind our construction manager in the prison. He came up for parole this last year. We wrote him letters to the parole board to see about getting him released, which he's slated to do this summer, which is great. And Kevin not only took some great initiative on his own, but when we built our first home down there, he created this sign for us for R3. And as a cutting board, we use this at home. So every time I cut cheese on there, I remember Kevin. But the other thing he did, which was fascinating, Kevin, he talked to his construction manager at the prison. He said, hey, I'd really love to build a Murphy bed. Can I do that? And he ordered all the parts off of off of Google, and they all shipped to the prison. We come down the next time to visit. He's got a Murphy bed that he's built, and he did this from scratch. He pulled it out and pulled it to a desk. He was so proud of it. It was just like really cool. But this was his pride and joy of something we're not necessarily building, but he took on his own initiative to do. So really fun. Kevin will, as I say, get out in July or August, and we're looking to employ him at one of our manufacturing sites outside of the prison. And I'll explain the difference in between the two, but we need both. So do you have a question? R3, yeah, good point. See up there, rehabilitation, restoration, and respite. That's why we went to R3, because that's hard to get out of your mouth in one word. But we're all about the rehabilitating, in particular, our prisoners, our homeless, and so on. The restoration. Sorry, welcome. Restoration certainly comes in putting their lives back together that have fallen apart for many of them. And after 15, 20 years in prison, it gets hard to come back into society in many ways and kind of replug in. And then third, respite. It's just kind of breathe. Can we breathe? And in healthcare arenas too, we actually use some of these villages for respite care for people coming out of acute care stays in hospitals that need some recovery time. So it's another way to give back to that whole respite picture. So that's my story of Kevin, which I'm really proud of him and excited to see him and come to work for us. We hope this sometime this fall when we open up a couple plants. So we have a board member, Joe Duran. Sometime I'd love to get him over here. He's a longtime developer with Self-Help Bank, which some of you may have heard about, but Self-Help Bank is one of the most progressive banks at getting loans and lending out there into communities, and also creating pathways for people who are building homes or villages to actually have sweat equity in their property and accounts against their loan and everything else. So they actually, really innovative guy. He helped start a couple of programs in Stanislaus County where we're building some 2 projects right now over there on church properties. But and he's Hispanic. He's got a real passion for the Latino community, which I love, of putting young men and women back to work. But he said we cannot succeed at our mission unless we rebuild a healthy ecosystem. And they've really designed an ecosystem not just around housing, but around all these other things that are important. So we look at obviously low-cost housing solutions, but also how can we incubate some business enterprises in the villages where we're putting people. And that might be aquaponics, it might be actually construction trades, it could be a number of different things. But it's really important that people not only get housing, but they get employed. Those 2 elements are really critical, in particular for folks coming out of incarceration. So, but what we really do want to do with these small communities that we're developing, or the villages that we're building, is to bring people together and restore community between people. We are so disconnected, even as individuals outside of prison and outside of homelessness, but because we get stuck in our phones all day, right? And we don't talk to each other, and so it's really important that we recreate community. And the nice thing about the micro homes we're building is they actually, in some ways, encourage you to get out of your house. You might get a little bit claustrophobic in living in a 600 square foot unit for a period of time. But if you get out in community and talk to each other, we create community spaces in the villages where people can get out and have a barbecue together or eat together, whatever it may be. So intentional design in the communities we build is important. But here's kind of really our mission. We're about working as a nonprofit ministry. We're committed to collaborating and helping in homelessness and recidivism. And one of the key things you'll hear time and time again is the cost of housing. Anyone know what it costs on average right now in San Francisco to build an apartment unit? Take a guess. $1.4 million. Yep. How many of you can afford $1.4 million for a 700 square foot apartment? None of us here, right? Nor do we want to. I mean, we don't want to be caught up in that. So the other thing is, anyone know how long it's taking? Some of you were on a conference call yesterday.
7 years.
Oh, shut up, Paul. 7 years from the time you get land to the time people move in is the length of time public funded housing is taking these days. So that's just nuts in terms of the need that we have and how we're not meeting that demand. So we're all about both obviously a social purpose, but also developing low-cost modular housing. One of the unique things about building in the prison, we can't pay prisoners. We would love to. One of our objectives is actually have a slush fund, if you will, for those who participate in our construction program when they get out, that they can access use for first, last month rent, whatever they need. But we can't pay prisoners, so the cost of us to produce a housing unit is the cost of materials. Imagine what that does to the price of housing, right? So if you're seeing average ADUs and so on the market here costing $300,000-$400,000, we can produce a 400 square foot unit, cost of materials for just under $40,000. That's good when you can use it for nonprofit purposes to get it out in the market. That's it. Yes, sir. Oh, he's got his mouth full. You can't ask with a mouthful. Nice.
Can prisoners volunteer for the work, or can they actually do the work and and have them do it without being paid? I don't know what the regulations are, but I heard that prisoners do get paid like 25 cents an hour for doing like license plates. And
they do at Prison Industries up in Folsom, which is a for-profit industry that does a lot of building that they charge retail prices for, if you will, on the market. So they do some of that. In vocational programs in the prison, the prisoners, number one, have to raise their hand and say, I want to be in it. And by the way, we can't open up every prison to a vocational program because in many prisons, they can't find enough people that want to participate. Second thing is you have to have all of your instructors lined up. You have to have your general contractor, you have your framer, mechanical, et cetera, et cetera. They all have to be in place so that you can actually teach a program. And third, you got to be able to form teams of 4 in the prison. And the teams of 4 are people who may have expertise in the framing, one in mechanical, one in electrical, one in finishes or solar, or some of the other applications. But those teams of 4 all build an entire unit. And the framer teaches the other 3 how to be framers. The mechanical guy teaches the other 3 how to do the mechanical side of stuff. So they cross-train, which is great. They actually get credentialed in each of those disciplines, and those credentials count against their time in sentencing. So they get some time off on their sentencing. So there is not only a bonus to them, if you will, and an incentive internally with those credentials, but also they're on a pathway towards employment when they get out. Really important. We also work with a youth build program called Rancho Cielo in Salinas, California. This is for 18 to 24-year-old kids that didn't make it in traditional education settings and so on, or were at high risk of poverty and generational poverty in their families, who many of them are from farm worker families working in the fields. They have a construction program on their campus and a culinary program and ag tech and a couple others. But in the construction program, we can do the same with the youth there, train them up in the construction trade so that when they get out of that program, which is the 2-year program, they're ready to go out and build, which is great. So we work with at-risk youth build programs too. But here's our challenge. We all love to see everything start declining on homelessness until we hit the pandemic, and boom, it shot right back up. Even with all the great things going on in the market and housing being put out there and shelters and so on, the housing unhoused in our communities is going up. So in California, it went up from about 160,000 in California in 2022 to now closer to 180,000 today. Fastest growing county of homelessness is in San Diego County. Who wouldn't want to live in a tent in San Diego County, right? That's part of the problem. All the coastal cities are nice places to live. So, but obviously the cost of housing comes into play with that. Of our homeless, 60% are unsheltered, 40% are sheltered. That could be a shelter, could be transitional housing, it could be domestic violence shelter, it could be a number of different instances. But with this large number at 60% that we're trying to address, the other thing I cited earlier is 65% of our prisoners end up returning to prison in 3 years, and the incarceration costs $100,000 a piece. Not a good model. So that's why you see such focus on CDCR these days, on rehabilitation, hopefully to get people who are coming out rehabilitated back into the community. Ted?
Return to prison in 3 years, if not housed and employed. It means 65% of those who re-enter come back. Correct. And the 2 main factors are employment and then housing. Okay.
Yep. Thank you. And this is where our number, by the way, is in the United States. So California has about a little over 30% of the unhoused population in the United States, which is huge. This, the other thing is this looks at in California overall, as well as in different regions of the state, how are we doing at building and meeting the need for affordable housing? Now, affordable housing, I use that term very loosely because affordable, I call it attainable, or like to, because affordable these days means a whole bunch of different stuff in different communities, and often it's not affordable to a family who's working at Walmart or, working in the city where rent is $3,500 and they're making $2,000 a month. It doesn't work, So, but we're really short on this type of housing. We're only hitting about 35% of our goal on this type of housing that we need to build California wide. And so that just tells you again how big the need is. In San Francisco, the pipeline right now for new affordable housing units with the city and their planning department, they have about 11,000 units in the pipeline right now, all battling for the same money, all battling for the same attention, everything else to get there. So the good news is there's some production going on and so on. The bad news, there's both not enough and it's very expensive, very expensive.
And the expensive part is, we were talking about this before the meeting, was it's a conundrum, because while you can't afford the house, anybody that wants to do low income housing has to pay a premium for it. And so you can't really solve homelessness with high expense at the same price you can in other places. So the very location where you have homelessness, it's very expensive to build in. So helping folks out, it's twice as expensive, and getting a house built for folks who can afford it, it's also expensive.
And getting developers so that they can actually walk away with, making a margin on their development is really tough too. There are some incentives built into waiving certain fees and things like that. Density bonuses, as they say, that allow you to build more units on an acre than you normally would be able to, just again, so you can make enough income back to pay for your capital expenses. But it's tough to get developers to the plate, both because of the timeline and the risks, but also because of the cost of doing these projects. So there's a study done by the Urban Land Institute. By the way, they have a conference going on right now that I'm going to run to this afternoon at the Hyatt. People from all over the community are coming to talk about housing and some of the creative financing solutions and things like that. You guys were here with Kathy Chow Rothberg, I think a couple months ago when she presented. She's presenting at that conference on some creative ways of financing, which we definitely need, because the government financing both comes with strings attached, but raises the cost of housing projects by 30 to 40%, which is not good. So, but these are key takeaways from a study they did in 2022 about homelessness. Obviously, they came away with the same conclusion about housing being critical, but social services are also critical. These are all the wraparound services you need for mental health, for addictions, for just getting your driver's license, getting a social security card, how to do a resume, how to go to work. So, but also just how important it is that innovation matters. Well, we're in it for innovation. We're in it for teaching. We're in it for saving lives. But the way we're doing it is one way to innovate. Fortunately, there's lots of folks working on new and innovative ways to do construction, because it's expensive. And it's costing well over $300-400 a square foot to build without the innovation going on. But this is also an economic issue. One of the conundrums, again, of this is the disparity between the cost of housing going up and wages. Wages have not kept up at all with what the cost of housing is. And anytime you go out for a loan or trying to get housing, they're always looking at your income. They want to know that you aren't going to spend more than 30% of your income on housing. And they also want to know that you've got a track record, a history of paying off your loan. They want to see an income that's actually, therefore, 3 times what it would cost you on a monthly net for the cost of housing. So that makes it also hard. Well, what we're about, if you will, is these integrated village communities. And a lot of the times we look at either public properties like city or county properties or church properties. Church properties are particularly effective. There's a lot of churches, unfortunately, that during COVID and so on, either shut down or downsized. A lot of them have excess land, too. In Modesto, for example, where we're working, there's over 110 church properties that would qualify for putting housing on their property. We're doing 2 of those right now. But a lot of these church properties become both redemptive in terms of extension of their mission, which is great, and maybe even people they've already been serving that could live in these houses, but also becomes a revenue stream back to the church that helps support both the operations and the social services, the wraparound services that are needed for these communities. So when we look at this is some of the questions that churches ask, and who are we going to serve, and are there constraints? Is the zoning going to work? Is our neighbor going to come out and knock on our door and say we don't like this project? Our good old NIMBYism and all that good stuff. But ultimately, this is the kind of the model, if you will, for the whole picture. And we're trying to create that in 4 or 5 ways. As I said, we develop these low-cost modular micro home units. We're developing right now 400, 600, and 800 square foot units. Those work really well. We've done lots of studies about that, on who they serve and why that works well for the size of the families that we're serving in particular. As I said, we partner with both the prisons and youth build education programs. We in May reopening 2 prisons that were closed down from COVID and everything else, but in Soledad, and then another one over at Valley State Prison, which is in Chowchilla in the Valley. But the CDCR would like to open up 3 more prisons, one in Vacaville, one down in Avenal, which is down near Fresno, and then a 5th one down in Norco, which is East LA, to get housing supply out there, get these programs up and running. Hope to have those done by year end, maybe a little bit longer than that, but that's what we're shooting for. But this is just a little picture. I'll show you one later too of an integrated housing village. These happen to be 9 units on a church property over in Modesto, and this is going to be used for family transitional housing for families coming out of homelessness. And again, they have a mix of 400 square foot units, which are 2-bedroom, and then 600 and 800, which are 4-bedroom units. So they can accommodate families and everything else pretty well there. Interesting enough, on this project, the biggest objector to the project was the church next door, which is disappointing, but there was a reason. They run a kids program, and they were worried that somehow people moving into their neighborhood were going to do, atrocious things. Well, the funny thing about these villages, they're actually more managed than people living in your independent housing units out on the street. They've got things like property management companies and case management and mental health services, and on and on and on, which is where this collaboration is really important. But it is funny that they were the primary ones that came out. We're also looking at these mini manufacturing plants. Yeah, Ted.
Because
Ted's on our
Excuse
board.
me,
Ted's
one-
on our board. by the
One
way.
second, I forgot to mention this. We are recording, so if you have a question, please raise your hand and wait for a microphone, and we'll come around to you. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I just closed the loop on that you and David were able to be extra gracious with them, and you did turn them around. They're bully on the project now. So
Finally, huh?
that's the power of engaging everybody and, making a conversation and meeting them where they're at and, going the extra mile. So.
No, that's a good point. Actually, after all the objections and public forums and all that, the pastor, when we kicked off the project, came over and wanted to bless the project and pray with the pastor at the church here. And we keep them in the loop every month on where we are and who's coming in. But that's a good point. Those community meetings are vital. And what you say, we're not housing homeless that are on on our drugs or coming out of prison or whatever. It's not the way we tell people who's moving in the neighborhood. These are your neighbors, and these are people in need of housing just like you. So, thanks, Ted. These mini manufacturing plants are critical. We're going to be opening one in Ceres, which again is over south of Modesto this summer. It happens to be on a teen challenge ag plot of land. They've got 40 acres there. They happened to build a building that was 6,000 square feet, kind of a steel tilt-up building that works perfect for what we need. The application they were going to use it for got rejected by the county because they said it wasn't consistent with their zoning and everything after they'd already built the building, mind you. So we're going to use it, and we got their okay to go ahead and build housing units there. Teen Challenge program has 30 men in the program that are going through rehab and whatnot. Probably 10 of those are going to be in our construction program and managing that. So another cool redemptive story for guys coming out of that program.
So Eric, do we have solutions? I hear you talking about towns that have lots of land and you can build and put, single unit facilities on there. Are you working on any inner city projects where you're doing more smaller transitional stuff? Are projects that you're connected with at all?
We are not ourselves doing that yet. I'll be in Reading tomorrow, talking with a manufacturer up there that's doing some of the SIP panel tilt-up kind of buildings that they can add modules to, a bedroom, a kitchen, a shower, etc., and turn these into bigger units, smaller units. They're building these, interesting enough, for FEMA, for about 200 homes that are going to be shipped over to Lahaina for all the disaster that happened over there with the fires. Really cool stuff. But these are units that also can become permanent units and sit on. So there's transitional housing is meant to be, just by definition, usually from about 3 months to 24 months maximum. Permanent housing obviously is one where you have perhaps some housing vouchers and some support, things like that. But it's on permanent foundations intended to be in villages or individual units. So there's some great organizations, as you guys know about, that are doing transitional housing. We may get into that just by virtue of a mix of villages that we create, if that pathway is necessary, and may very well be for whom we're working with. But Dignity Moves, who you've heard about, is one of those, and you've had Elizabeth Funk in the past has been a speaker here as well, and they're doing several villages down in Santa Barbara, up here in the Bay Area, in San Francisco. So transitional housing is important. It's not by the way, licensed and certified the same way as a permanent housing development. They don't have to go through all the same processes on the foundation reviews and CEQA reviews and everything else. So it gets housing out there quickly, which is great. But at the same time, those aren't housing units that could permanently remain in that location. So so they'll figure out where to move that next village, if you will, that will help support things going forward. So the other thing we work on a lot is obviously the pathway to employment. And one of the reasons we partner with agencies like Lau Family, Kathy Chow Rothberg, she's got 1,000 employers that she works with in all the communities she's working with to get people who actually are still living in their tent employed and working for some of these employers. Really cool stuff. We want that pathway for our guys coming out of prison or out of the youth build programs. But that's where we can take advantage of partnering together and really need to get connected to those employers that are redemptive from that standpoint. This is just a little fun village we're playing with in Moss Landing. This is actually at a site. Moss Landing is down near Watsonville, near us. This is a site that's 10 years ago, the school closed down and they haven't had anything at the school since. It's got some buildings that sit right here on the campus that'll need some renovation, but we're looking at putting potentially one of our modular housing manufacturing plants here. We're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 different housing communities. One of the things we're looking at is putting teacher housing on this property and making a little teacher housing village, trading out, if you will, the cost of the land for the cost of building a teacher housing village for our teachers in our area. Every year, Monterey School District has 100 vacancies for teachers because they can't get teachers to come because it's too expensive to live there. And they're trying to figure out solutions for teacher housing. This also has a little area where we're looking at maybe a farm worker housing community. We have a lot of H-2A farm workers that come from Mexico, from Guatemala, from Philippines to come work and harvest. This is right next to about probably 400 acres of strawberry fields. So great synergy there. One other thing we're looking at is actually a parking yard here for some truck trailers. We have a gentleman who runs trucks up and down the state. They need a place to put trailers while they're in between. 3 miles away, Michael Brown, who runs Michael's Transportation, takes guys that were in prison before and trains them to be commercial truck drivers. Why not do this here at his, or bring them over to his spot right there in Watsonville to train up and again create another career pathway. We're also going to look at aquaponics and hydroponics on the site there. So anyway, a lot of fun. We always build, by the way, a soccer field. Anyway, we have farm worker housing. We have to have a soccer field. So yes, sir. Oh, you want to?
Well,
No,
we
they
are
want to record you.
recording, so thank you.
Okay. You mentioned hydroponics and aquaponics. What specifically would you be building out in these areas regarding those two types of food, food production?
So these type of buildings can be prefabbed, and they could be configured to customize for any kind of crops you want to grow in there. This would be used for 2 purposes. One is to provide fresh produce for the communities living on this campus. So it's a feeding service, if you will. And secondly is to take produce to farmers market locally. So we wouldn't be competing with obviously people that are growing food around our area, but we're looking at again things like beans or legumes, and we grow lettuce like crazy in our.
So
area.
are these lettuce grown outside or inside?
Inside. This is all an
So
inside structure.
Are you familiar with freight farms?
Mhm.
Are you using one of their boxes?
We have not yet, but we know about them, and
Okay.
yeah, there's another
Yeah.
one a couple of them out of Washington and Oregon as well that do. But I'd love to get more
I'd love
names.
to
Yeah.
talk more about that. Because
Good.
I'm very interested in building that out for the interim housing DAO as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We have another group in San Diego. We're looking at putting another mini manufacturing plant down in Vista. There's a group down there called Solutions for Change, which would be working with post-incarceration people for about 20 years. But they want to do a construction trade industry on property they own down there. And interesting enough, we're being asked to build about 4 classrooms for a Christian school that's down in Chula Vista down there, that this could be their first project out the chute to build these classrooms. By the way, the footprint of those classrooms is the same as our largest housing unit, 800 square feet. So some good synergies there. And we're talking tomorrow afternoon with them about getting that up and going. So. Well, all of you are familiar, but these are kind of, as you're looking at housing projects, these are sort of the ones that you focus in on as the ones either are going to be funders or initiators of projects. So cities, counties, churches, homeless coalitions tend to dictate a lot of HUD funding coming into counties and have to dole that out. Philanthropic donors, But we also get into some unique markets like seniors or trafficking agencies, things like that. And then ag firms, as I said, is big for us down in our area for H2A housing. The estimate in Monterey County alone, we're short about 25,000 housing units just for H2A workers coming and working during the season for us. So, by the way, they go back to Mexico and back to Guatemala and so on from November through March. Guess what the best time is to have housing for homeless? November to March. So we're talking to some of those agencies about using those as emergency shelters during the winter. Very open to that, but it also covers them during our winter season, if you will. So kind of funding synergies there. These are the 4 areas we're in, these low-income affordable housing villages, the rehab of distressed properties, church-based villages, and then we do also build private ADUs. We just finished an ADU in Salinas and have the training and the skills from our staff to do that too. So,
Eric, what's an ADU for some of the members?
Sorry, yeah, that's for accessory dwelling unit. Some people call it a granny unit, but it's just kind of a backyard unit. And most cities, county control how large those can be, anywhere from a max of about 1,200 square feet down to typically 400 square feet. So independent living units that you can put in your backyard, and a lot of those restrictions on where you can put them, how you can put them, et cetera, have come off in the last couple of years, which has been very helpful.
In San Francisco, ADU is the garage.
You can convert a garage. It's called a junior ADU, yeah, typically. But actually in San Francisco, I think in about almost every community you can build a junior ADU, which is converting a room or a garage where you have to have a bathroom and a kitchenette. And you can add a second independent standalone unit, an ADU as well. So it just depends on the size of your lot and setbacks and all that. So these are locations where we're at. I talked about the 5 prison locations that they're hoping to be in this year and next. We are operating at Rancho Cielo and Salinas, and we've talked a couple times about Stuart Pirelli. Some of you have met here too, but he teaches at the Cypress Mandela construction program in Oakland. Love to see them get up and building at that location. They're already building stuff, so it'd be great to put housing units into their coffers if we can. And then this is where we're looking to do many manufacturing plants. I already mentioned Ceres. We're going to do one down in Vista, and then we're either going to put one in Moss Landing, like I showed you a minute ago, or in Salinas. These are really strategic, by the way, to produce local housing, but to hire people locally in the community to work and live there. So it's a kind of a fun little mini strategy, if you will. We don't need a lot of space to do it. That's where the prison locations are, just so you have a sense of their distribution. And some of these are further along based upon how many of the staff and everything else are in place to be able to run the program. So this a little bit bigger blow up of that picture I was talking about in Modesto. This is one of the church housing projects there with 9 units. You can see on this, these are all 400 square foot units or 2 bedrooms. We have 2 600 and then an 800 square foot unit. And this is, by the way, with a church that was already serving for the past 10 years families coming out of homelessness. But what they used to do is they'd rotate it between about 10 churches. So people would stay for a month at one church, and then they rotate to another church and another church. So, which is not bad. It's just the stability and being in one place and everything else, as well as just learning independent living skills, is a challenge when you run a program like that. Well, they're all going to put them on this campus now, which is great. And we have 5 partners that surround and run the wraparound services needed for this. So CalAIM, which is the Medi-Cal provider, has a lot of the mental health services and transportation. They've extended a lot of services over the last year. We have a property manager who's very versed in running about 800 units in Stanislaus County already of low-income housing. So they take care of all the leasing, property maintenance, kicking people out, which you hope you never have to do, but sometimes you do. And then we have case managers that come in and work and sit with the families and individuals. So and then the funding partner, Stanislaus Equity Partners, is the one that helped put the funding and some of the support from the community together for that. So this will be done hopefully at the end of this month and ready for occupancy in June, which is really cool. So yes, sir.
Nice. Yeah, that answered a bit of my question. And I was just curious with it, with the church supporting the community, how active are they with services and programming?
We gave the church as much freedom to define what they wanted to do or not do. And they're not case managers. Their primary function is to integrate people back into community, to welcome into church, to host if they needed AA groups or other things at the church. But they wanted to hand off the property management. They wanted to and it's a small congregation. There's 70 people at the congregation. So they're also dependent on the rent, if you will, the funding mechanisms behind the scenes to run the operations, which pays the case management functions and everything else. One of the agencies, called the Center for Human Services, is going to provide case management for the families for free. They're going to be able to subsidize it with other grants they already have in place, and so they've offered to come in and provide those services. Great organization doing amazing things, but they're going to come in and provide that at no cost. So that's that project in Modesto.
Okay,
I always
that's
call. I had a good friend that lived there. I used to say, "Hey, I'm going over to visit Modesto today, John." He said, "Well, why'd you call it that?" I said, "Well, when I lived there back in the mid '90s, working with a healthcare organization." He said, "Well, God, there's more cows than people, John." And he's gotten mad. He's never gotten over that since. So
Okay, so that's in Modesto. That project is already funded, right, and running. Okay.
yeah, we're about, as I say, 1 month away from finishing that. This one in Riverbank, which is only about 15 miles away, is a second project with 8 homes. This one's going to be used for single moms or moms with kids coming out of homelessness or out of domestic violence to be housed there. So this is a former Covenant Church property, but they worked out a deal where Stanislaus Equity Partnership bought the land, and they're again allowing the church to continue to meet there, but they're really helping subsidize costs of running the church on that location. So this is a cool little project. It's going to have a couple phases. These are the micro homes that we're starting with, and then we're going to have some duplexes that we build out sort of in phase 2, which, by the way, will match kind of the housing element, if you will, of people across the street who were very concerned at our community meetings, but have since come on board, which is great. But that their housing that's going to be facing them will look a lot like theirs, and again, this community will be better run than probably their housing. So. There's one of the units. It's a 400 square foot unit. We have different colors and everything else, but here's kind of the layout of it. So you can see it's got these 2 bedrooms and then a whole central core. Nice thing about this, if we build a 600 square foot unit, we just take 2 bedrooms and add them over here on the other side. All the windows line up, all the doorways line up, everything else. So it's very, very versatile that way. The 800, we just add 1 more central core unit for ADA turnarounds and everything else. Again, really easy for compliance purposes and everything else. So. All right, I'm done, right, Paul? Well, sort of. Now we have to answer
Questions.
2 quick questions for you. Your knee's going to lead us in this, right?
Yeah. What are some of the, I guess, learnings that you found? I'm interested in like the employment piece, the pathways there, either in terms of like demand in the marketplace, like what types of things you're finding demand for, as well as for the different groups that you serve, like either what skills or abilities they have, like which different types of things they tend to gravitate towards.
Yeah. Great question. You guys all hear that, right? What are the employment opportunities and skill sets? Okay. So for our prisoners, one of the best relationships actually that CDCR has is with the unions, construction unions in the city and throughout the Bay Area. There's a huge union that runs 5, 6 different counties in terms of construction projects, all unionized, and they have a pathway right into employment for those guys. So the training they come out with prepares them right away to go to an apprenticeship program, and they can decide if they want to go into electrical or plumbing or kind of whatever they want, which is very helpful. They're already utilizing them in multiple sites, building throughout the Bay Area here. So that pathway is really critical, as well as the credentials. What we're seeking to do is to train these guys in prison better than any other program out there that they get trained at. So they'll come out with skill sets that are off the charts, and everyone's going to clamor for people to hire them rather than just kind of settle for it. We have a need for 220,000 construction workers alone in the state of California right now. Isn't that that's kind of a good pathway, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And then you mentioned like hydroponic farming.
Yep.
So is there other agriculture and then?
Yes. So good point. In the ag side, we have probably the largest agriculture firms in the country, in our area. Taylor Farms being one of. How many of you ate a Taylor Farms bag of salad, right, the other night? Yeah, probably. Bruce Taylor is a good personal friend. Their family is extremely philanthropic. Worked with them for years and years. They're always innovating. In fact, they don't grow their own produce, interesting enough. They hire it out to all the farmers that produce it and bring it in for bag lettuce, and they just package it and send it out. But they're constantly contemplating and trying out new mechanisms to substitute for labor if they can sometimes, which obviously doesn't help the labor market, but it requires, though, your skill sets. be constantly upgraded and so on. So instead of being 25,000 housing units short on H2A workers, if we only need 15, number one, that we bring to the community because we have local people that can now do the forklifting, they can do the hydroponics, they can do the growing, they can make it more efficient. We're already having robotics do some of the weeding on row crops, for example, that can differentiate between a good plant and a weed. And they've got little cutters that go right down the row. We've got automatic planters. We have another guy who's developed some strawberry picking and planting devices that we want to actually incorporate potentially into this village in Moss Landing because they're right by the strawberry fields. So we try to match up, obviously, where our villages are and what the economic opportunities, employment opportunities are in each of those villages. So.
And are there any other categories besides those two that you think are interesting for employment?
Yes, and there's, by the way, in construction, there's not just one pathway, right? There's an interesting thing. We in our factories, we have to have inspections done in our factories on our units. They get certified by HCD, which is the equivalent of HUD for California. In order to get certified, though, you have to have quality control absolutely managed throughout. Inspectors, well, the company we're working with called Radco, big national company, does inspections all over the world. They're short on inspectors in California. So the nearest one that's going to inspect our 2 prisons is living in Lodi, which is good. It's about a half hour from our Chowchilla plant, but it's 2 hours to drive to Soledad, 2.5. Well, we get charged for 2.5 hours of going down and back and everything else. So we need, for example, inspectors that we can train up, and we're going to partner with Radco and see how we can put them through a training program specific to that. So there's some one-offs like that in the construction trades that make some sense. Working with Rancho Cielo, though, they have a culinary program. They have a full restaurant. They've got 50 students in the culinary program, and we in Monterey have a huge need for cooks. My wife is a human resources manager for a firm that runs restaurants and so on. She can't find cooks to save her life. We need them. So a synergy again with a program like Rancho Cielo, where we can hire and train up kids that are in that program with that campus to come work for us. So we're just exploring some of that, but again, we're trying to align obviously with the industries we already know about, which is important. So, thanks. Oh my goodness.
I have my question is, maybe you could talk about more. We're in Soledad Prison right now, and we have the relationship with Rancho Cielo. But in 2019, we were ready to move out into multiple prisons. It was all set up, and then COVID hijacked all that. And now we're building that up. Where's that at, and what needs to be in place for that to happen? Maybe you could talk more about that.
Yeah, I didn't mention this, but when we build units in the prison, they have to be utilized for nonprofit purposes or for government purposes. So when we ship them out, we can take advantage of the pricing on those and everything else that helps keep the cost of those projects down. But at the same time, they have to be used for that very specific purpose. One of the reasons we're setting up plants outside the prison is so we can serve the private market, right, and build units outside the prison. Also both locally but outside the prison, so we're not constrained by that. We also have more flexibility in plants outside the prison to build additional units and additional types of units, so we can customize them a little bit. Maybe we want Spanish-style roofs for Southern California, and we want tar roofs for Northern California. But you could do those kind of minor customizations that you get approved and everything ahead of time. But so we're planning on having the 3 plants outside the prison by the end of 2025, and we plan on having the 5 prison ones open by probably first quarter of next year. And between those, we should be able to produce about 250 housing units a year. Which would be great. Yeah. Cool.
So
Yes, sir.
I got the tail end of the presentation, so excuse me if you've already mentioned this, but what is the process of getting the neighborhood and the community buy-in for these developments there? You mentioned that they were opposed to it at first, and then somehow they got on board. Was that through various incentives or promises to improve the sewage in their neighborhoods? Was there government incentives and stuff to get the buy-in, or what was that looking like?
No, great question. One of the things you do before you ever start developing anywhere is you look at your neighborhood and see, is this going to be a good fit? And to go to Hillsborough and build a tiny home villages for people coming out of homelessness is not going to work in most neighborhoods, right? But what we do is we first look at the zoning. Will the zoning support multifamily or residential family like we're talking about? What's the constraints on the density and everything else? Secondly, what's the surrounding neighborhood look like? We also want to know, are we close to supportive services? So can we, A lot of people don't have transportation often when they're coming out of homelessness. So is it close to a grocery store? Do they have laundry services? Do they have the ability to walk to church or to a bus stop or whatever? So those, you look at neighborhoods that way too. And then ultimately, if you should do anyway, even if you're not required to, go to a community meeting, invite the neighbors in and just discuss the program. We always come with a Q&A sheet with us. It has all the typical questions that are asked and everything else. We stay away though from all of the trigger words, right? We don't talk about homelessness. We don't talk about violence. We don't talk about drugs. People want to bring all that stuff up, and we dispel it. In fact, you can get studies that will show none of those things happen. In fact, your neighborhood improves because of all the wraparound services. Even property values go up because you're developing undeveloped land that was probably a waste dump for people throwing trash out before. So you're actually helping enhance your neighborhood with these. And these are not bad-looking units. You know, these aren't just tents that are like showing up on George Washington University. No, I'm just. but they're really nice homes, and again invites people to be neighbors. And I know that was a comment, wasn't it? Sorry. Yes, sir. Ma'am. Oh, one of you two.
Oh, who's? Okay, you want to go ahead or?
You okay in time? Yeah.
My name is Ellen. I have been living in here in San Francisco for 38 years. Whatever the model that you sharing here today, it's very inspiring. But in San Francisco, it's very different. San Francisco, we don't have a housing crisis. We don't have homeless crisis. We have a corrupted government leader crisis. Right now, we have 38% empty apartments, empty, sitting there empty, not using it. And we have 35% empty business front doors that we don't use. And then we had less than about 5,000 homeless on the street. And then they use this homeless day in, day out, traffic here, traffic there, and going Oakland and the Bay Area just to get funding. So whatever you're doing, it's unbelievable. And it's very easy to solve in San Francisco. However, we don't have the land if we want to do something like that. And because we have a control group behind the scene, all this empty apartment, we are not able to release to the public, not able to help the homeless. That's the problem that we are facing now.
I can't comment on the political environment. I don't work, day in, day out like you do with the supervisor and everything else. What I can say is two things. When you get in higher density city situations where your plots of land are smaller, you have to go up. And right now we are not building multi-story units, but we work with partners that do, that are prefab units that you can stack up. So Factory OS is one of those in the Bay Area. We're visiting another tomorrow called US Offsite that does this. So looking at solutions, right, for using land in a way that goes up, mostly in the cities, is obviously a good way to use land. The other thing, though, you mentioned potentially conversion of unused either apartments or renovated apartments. We're going to be looking at one in Oakland on Friday, or commercial buildings. Everyone knows that commercial buildings are being vacated. More people are working at home, even though there's a trend, I think, back and away from that to get people to work again. It's nonetheless, we're never going to catch up where we were pre-pandemic. So conversion of commercial space is very interesting, but it creates conundrums. Things like when you have a bedroom, you have to have a window. Well, if you try and convert, in inner space where there was office cubicles and everything else before, and you don't have a window for a bedroom, it creates some configuration issues that are a challenge. You can deal with them and do it, but sometimes it's more expensive to convert existing buildings than it is to build new. But the timeline is often a lot shorter. So yeah, there's some trade-offs, but very good points.
So you mentioned earlier that you were using some automation in some of your work. Have you thought about using robots to build some of these homes? Because there are some firms that actually build homes with robots. They use a very quick setting concrete, and they just have a robot that lays the concrete and builds up the home. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yep, visited one of them in Colorado. There's one in Texas. They're still not,
and also containers.
Yeah, still not I'll comment on that too. State of the art in terms of you still have to have all those same trades come in and put your plumbing and electrical and everything else in after the walls are poured. It takes away from labor, though. We'd rather have the preponderance of 95% of how housing's built and everything else, have people that are laborers be paid to do that and be able to attain livable wages. So those robotic things work well where you don't have a lot of codes and everything else. In California, we're pretty strict on a lot of that stuff. So containers create their own problems. They can be utilized in great ways, and they are. The price of containers has gone up 3 times since this whole trend started using containers. So they're not as cost efficient, if you will, as they used to be, and you're confined to what you can do with the space you have. But they do have a place and a purpose, and they work in some arrangements. We okay on time? Okay, yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you for the talk today. One of the things you mentioned, 65% of prisoners return to prison in 3 years, if not housed and employed. And I think we would go to say that the same thing happens with people in recovery, that if you are getting out of recovery and are not housed and employed, the same thing will definitely occur. And that's what we've really been talking about as the whole wraparound services. I'm interested to hear about the wraparound services that are being offered and what you think is the most poignant to be offered.
Yeah. I had another slide, but it depends on the community you're in, and it depends on who you're serving with your housing development. If I'm just serving a senior community and we're housing people that might have some chronic health conditions, let's get a clinic on site, but they don't need necessarily methadone treatment plan, or they don't need, so you always tailor your services based upon what your village needs are and everything else. What we like to do, and we're really in a very humble way good at this, of going into a community and finding the best partners on the ground, and then we create a matrix. What do we need for this community? Who's going to do it? And what kind of contracts do we need? Where do we find the funding if it's not already there for this? But our matrix is, maybe 6, 7 organizations, and we've got, several different functions. But when we do that matrix, we define really clearly who's going to do what. And then we put agreements together. We've got several templates for memorandums of understanding of who's going to do what, how are you going to be paid, how are you going to be responsible, et cetera, et cetera. What reports do you have to submit, which is always a fun one, right? The reports are nuts these days, but yeah, it just really depends on the community you're serving. Like you said, the needs are much greater for people potentially coming out of either our incarceration or out of recovery programs, et cetera, because they need ongoing AA programs or whatever it may be. But nonetheless, that matrix is really critical, and then you go find your partners on the ground. If you don't have it on the ground, then you find someone who's doing it in another community really well and say, hey, can we get you to do it in this one? We need some more services there. This has been an interesting conundrum, though. City, you guys know the name of CityNet, maybe by they're a big organization down in Southern California serving homeless and doing a number of in Santa Barbara and Orange County, and so a number of services. But they started coming into Northern California, and they're actually part of a big housing project up in Sacramento. My son happens to work with them in Santa Barbara, so I know more about them than I probably should. But one of the conundrums they had is they've been asked to come into communities to provide service or provide services in communities because they can't find local partners that are willing to expand their services or grow their capacity. And that could be for a number of reasons, whether it's funding or staffing or we're just tired of all this. There's a big burnout, right? Big burnout rate too in the whole case management industry and things like that. So that gets your question pretty good? Yeah, thanks. Yes, sir.
Yeah, cool question. On the employment side, as you guys are training up individuals, how dynamic is your relationship with employers? Do you guys have a set fixed number that the folks you're training end up working for, or are the industries that you're training in such high demand that they can basically go anywhere and find work?
Yeah, it's a little more difficult with the prisoners because they're not able to get face-to-face with most of the employers right before they get out. One thing we're trying to correct, though, is in prisons, often prisoners get discharged to the community they came from, where they probated from. And in the majority of those either go to the Bay Area or Southern California. We'd like some of them to be probated to our county so we can employ them and have them locally there. And we have to work with CDCR actually to get special permission and whatnot. But what they want to make sure is they're going to land in a place where they've got housing and support services and everything else. It's going to give them the best chance of success. So, but those employer relationships really are driven primarily with the prisons through CDCR and the relationships. They've got phenomenal. I mean, up in San Quentin alone, I think they have over 100. Ted can comment on that. Over 100 different programs, vocational programs, et cetera, connected to the community in amazing ways. And they've got a volunteer force that comes in as well to those programs. So they get some of those natural connections just with people that are coming in to serve. But they're really trying to actively get the rehabilitation portion of prisons in particular connected to employers so that they don't get left out on the street when they come out. So, yeah. On there. And then.
Yeah, I think I'm next. Yes. One to comment on the previous question of the wraparound services. The most important wraparound service is employment. That's the number one factor in fact, almost seeing that as the center, and everything else is to help them there. Even the housing, because if you have employment, you have options. So it's building it around that, and really the certainly coming out of prison, they're already detoxed. It's helping them stay, and the number one thing is employment, and also the biggest like one of the, we're not just training them for jobs, we're actually giving them hope and purpose. And so that is why our program is performing so well, because the guys are deeply motivated, because they're not just building for a future, they're right now contributing to society. That restores dignity, gives them a purpose. It also creates community. So, that's the important thing. My question was, you had talked about in our last board meeting, you'd mentioned the Lego, basically the Lego building, which is kind of relates to the previous question. This is a coming technology that could be disruptive. It might not, but it's exciting, and it's basically building Lego pieces that are then constructed on site. Can you talk more about that? Like where's that relationship at, and how soon would we start incorporating that into our process?
Sure. There's a number of disruptive technologies that really help bring construction to the forefront quicker than not. One of the reasons we do modular, by the way, is if we're building on a raw land site, all the site work can be done at the same time the houses are being built. And so it cuts your construction timeline down by usually about 50%, maybe 40, 50%, which is great. If you're borrowing money for a project and likewise and paying interest on that, you can imagine the savings over even just 4 or 5 months to a project, let alone when we build modular off-site for a government project, we don't pay prevailing wages. We can't pay wages, first of all, for our prisoners, but prevailing wages adds 30, 40% of cost to your labor costs. So this is, again, another innovative way to keep the cost down of the overall project. The nice thing with some of these, again, innovative construction technologies coming up, one of them is called SIP panels, structurally engineered panels. And those are panels that take advantage of pre-constructing walls, either from alternative materials, some of them even more friendly than lumber or carbon or things like that. But the nice thing about them is they can be pre-built in forms, and you could fill them with all sorts of different kind of insulation. Some are experimenting, for example, in Canada, interesting enough, with using fiber from sawdust, if you will, from leftover from lumber. One of the reasons they're doing that is the paper industry has tanked. People aren't using, good to see you again. People aren't using paper like they used to. Everything's going digital or scan and everything else. Well, all the waste product they used to use from cutting all this lumber, which is our primary supplier in the U.S. for lumber, is now sitting there without a purpose. Well, if we can repurpose it for insulation and it works effectively and it's fire resistant, et cetera, when they treat it, great. What a great way to use a product that way. But these SIP panels can be prefabbed. And then when you get to a site, it makes it also easier for unskilled laborers to put these together. You can have a general contractor on site that knows exactly what needs to be done, but they can instruct 4 or 5 students from what's the big one that what's the big company that does the no this is it's a tech company that does Salesforce. Salesforce, part of their company motto is to get their folks going out and volunteering. They actually pay projects for people to go out and work on their behalf. Well, you can send a whole team of Salesforce people out that could put a Lego set together under the direction of someone who knows what they're doing, right? And put together 4 walls in about an hour and a half or 2 hours. That's cool. Then you got to still, the plumbing, electric, and all that. But if you could do those kind of projects and bring stuff to the market quicker, those, by the way, are panels we can build in the prison. One of the things we're talking about, maybe not just the prison, but maybe even in jails, which have shorter term duration and so on, so you have less time to train people up. In the jails, if we could build those panels and store them up for disaster relief, we always have disasters going on. If we can create those in a stockpile for disaster relief or transitional housing, temporary housing, where they're easy to put up and take down, et cetera, what a great way to go. So there's a place for that. Again, we're meeting tomorrow with a manufacturer in Reading that's launching this that we're very excited about. We may actually do some of their products in some of our mini factories around elsewhere. So
we got a couple more questions, but I had a question for you. So one of the back on the screen there, it says what key takeaways. So you challenged me. So I went to my local supervisor and just asked about our prison system. And he said he approves lumber every year because there's a training program and they set up the housing and they tear it down again. They get certified. And one prisoner had asked if he could extend his sentence for 2 weeks so he could get certified. And it was really interesting. And so he had to get approval from the supervisor to get out there. And then I just said, so you're tearing it down. Wouldn't it be better if we could like invest those houses? He's been looking for something. And so started that whole conversation about, can we get R3 to come into our jails and our federal prisons in like the Alameda County area. Very interested in doing that. And he wants to see electrical and plumbing out there too. So part of this is just making people aware that there are resources that are out there. And then also starting to grease the skids for people that have properties where those places could go. So I think part of what we can do is just make the community aware of the places where we either can pull through or help kind of expand the adoption of these models that we're being presented with. And we had other questions too.
Yes, I have a question. This is all temporary housing. Do you have any plans to make like permanent subdivisions or something like that?
No, this is permanent. These are they're modular manufactured homes.
Well, it sounds like people rotate through. It sounds like you have a program to get them on their feet, and basically you get them back into out of that house and have another group come through. That's not the.
That it depends on the again the purpose of the project. These can be used for permanent housing. They'll last as long as your house, as my house. They're 50, 60, 70-year homes, built with the same materials, everything else. They're put on permanent foundations. We do a modular so we can get them out of the prison, right? we had to build them at 12.5 feet so we could get them under the sally ports in the prison. So there's some intentionality too, and why we're building 1-story units at this point in time. And not 2 to start, because you can't, it's harder to transport. And obviously you put those on top of each other and everything else. But no, these are permanent. In fact, I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons we're doing permanent housing and not tiny homes is if you want to get housing vouchers for people that qualify, HUD won't give you a housing voucher if you're not on a permanent foundation, because they need a permanent address for someone to get their mail and to get case management and responsibility and everything else. They don't need someone towing their home all over the United States trying to track them down with a housing voucher, because that doesn't work really well. So these are permanent foundations, and the foundations can be slab foundations, they can be perimeter port foundations, sometimes they can be pier blocks. So we keep the cost down also on the foundations, all in cost by using and deploying some of these alternative methods. So.
Okay, we're going to take one more question before we close for the day.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the wraparound services and the matrix sort of approach that you mentioned, finding the best of providers in each area, do you have an internal process or committee that provides oversight for those organizations and also gauges the emerging pain points and blockers of the actual residents as those programs are being distributed? And
man, what a setup for GeoBrowser, huh? Good phase 2 program. Quick answer is no, because we set free, if you will, the local community to manage those projects themselves. Now they may have, so for example, our 2 church housing projects in Stanislaus County going on right now, they both projects, the people coming into the houses go through their coalition, their COC locally. So that means they are already registered on HIMS, which is a requirement. They come up to the top of the list on the housing bit. So they already have information, both of who's moving in there, when they're moving out, the support services, everything else is required as part of the HIMS program. For those that don't have that requirement or that are kind of private developments, whether we track that or not, I'd love to collect some data, at least some satisfaction. And what we're doing actually is as we're going through this, putting a matrix of all the data points that we possibly could want on any of these projects, whether they're transitional or shelter or permanent or whatever, and then pick and choose the ones we can actually collect, right? But also those that are pertinent to that project. And so I think that's a great application for GeoBrowser, and ultimately tracking not just the data in a very constructive way, but what's the best practices? What works the very best at achieving what we're trying to achieve, which is stability and affordability and everything else? How do we measure what we're getting there? And if we can't measure, what's the famous saying? If you can't measure it, you can't can't fix it or whatever. So yeah, that's
what you
certainly a long-term
measure
goal. You bet.
grows, right? What you measure grows.
So I want to thank Eric as we give him a round of applause here for all the stuff.
Please.